we went to our favorite fabric store and we let him pick out the fabric. We have a very fun project today. We're going to make some kids' pom-pom hats in lovely polar fleece, warm and cozy, easy to use. Start by measuring the head of your little one and add an inch to that measurement, or 2.5 centimeters to that head circumference. You're going to use that as the width of the hat, and then you're going to add another inch to that number for your length. This is going to be a double layer hat, and when you turn it up and make a cuff, you get 4 layers of cozy fleece around your ears for the winter. Now I'm top stitching down that back seam. I've sewn the right sides together along that long raw edge to make a back seam, and I'm going to sew that seam flat with a top stitch on either side of the seam. And there is my top stitching. Nice and neat and comfy for the little head. And you'll see that it stretches in one direction. This fleece does anyway. Some fleece stretches in all directions. I prefer to use the one that just sort of stretches better in one direction. And now I'm just laying it out so that I have a pattern that's linear. So I'm going to try to make it nice and even at the bottom where that fold is, because that's where the cuff is going to turn up. And I'm just pinning, and I'm going to sew close to that raw edge at the top and sew those 2 layers together all the way around. And so right there where my fingers are going, all the way around. So I'll have a tube. And you'll see I'm using my trusty magnetic measure so that I get a nice even stitch line all the way around. And I have a serger, so I'm going to finish that edge with a serge, but you don't have to. That seam is going to go into the inside of the hat on the wrong side, close to the top. And now I'm going to measure down about 4 centimeters or 1.5 inches. And I'm going to sew my serge line flat. And I'm just taking a look at that bottom to make sure that all the lines are even. And I'll clip along that fold at the top now. And with the children's hat, we're going to put a little tab in on our adult version of this hat. And I will put a link here to the video that's already on our page for the adult version. We used a safety pin to attach our pom-pom from the inside of the hat, but we're going to put a tab here. And that way we don't need to use a pin for children. And we'll leave some long ends on our pom-pom, which we're going to make after this hat. And we'll put the ends through that tab and tie it in a bow or a knot to hold the pom-pom in place. And you can take the pom-pom off if you want to wash it, or if the child just wants to be free of the pom-pom for a different look. So I'm going to sew that tab in. And I'm not putting it on the back seam, I'm just placing it somewhere else on the hat. And I think that the tab length was about 2 inches or 5 centimeters, and maybe about 1/2 inch or 3/8 of an inch wide, which would be a centimeter or centimeter and a half. Then I'll go back and forth over that tab when I get to where I've got the tab pinned. And now I'm going to remove some of the bulk around that top. So I'm cutting notches out in between my seam, or my line of sewing that I just made, and that top edge. And I'm being careful not to cut into the seam that I just made. So I'm leaving a little bit of space between the point of my notch and my seam. And I'm making 6 of these notches, and I'm being careful not to cut into any of my sewing, including that back seam that I made at the beginning. And this just removes some of the bulk at the top, so it just takes away some of this fleece, because it is a double layer, and it's quite a lot of fleece when you try to gather it up. So I find that making these notches really helps to reduce that bulk. And I'm going to use a piece of elastic, and I'm going to thread it through that channel, and it's pretty easy to do with all those notches out. And I use 1/8 inch elastic or 3mm elastic. If you have something that's thicker, I'm sure that'll work too. But I'm in the hat business, so I have elastic in just about every size. Lucky me. And then when I get to the place where I started, I'm just going to cut my elastic off the spool and take the other end out of the bodkin. And I'm going to start to gather it up and just sort of tuck those notches so that the raw edge of the notch is facing inside the hat. And you're going to find that your pom-pom is going to cover up any little peaks of notch that might poke out from time to time. And you just sort of spread out the gathering as you go. And you want to be able to, say, get your small finger through the opening at the top of the hat, so you're not going to pull it quite as tight as you possibly can, because you want to be able to get those tabs that we're going to put on the pom-pom through the top of the hat so that we can fasten it onto that tab that we sewed on. So I'll tie it in about 3 knots, and I just turned the hat inside out so that I could sort of put that knot on the inside of the hat. And now I've turned it right side out, and I'm just sort of checking to make sure that all of my raw notch cuttings are tucked inside. And here's where I'm sort of just testing out the hat. I'm turning up a cuff. And so far, so good. Now, you can make your hat longer if you want a deeper cuff. You can add more than 1 inch to the measurement that you get when you determine the width. And then the length is 1 inch more. You could add 2 inches or 3 inches to get a fuller cuff if you like, or a sloppier, longer toque. Carefully, I am cutting out a 4-inch circle of faux fur, and I'm just being careful just to cut into the knit backing and not through the actual fur. So take your time when you do that, and you'll get a really lovely result. And you see how the fur goes in one direction. So I'm going to sew the little tab ties that I'm going to attach to my pom-pom onto this round piece of fur now, before I actually start gathering up the edge of the round fur and making it into a furry bowl, which I will fill with a high loft polyester filling. And I'm using my thickest thread that I have and my largest needle, because I want this to be really strong, and I'm using a double thread. And I'm just going around the edge of that circle in a very generous basting stitch. Each stitch is at least a centimeter or centimeter and a half, or about 1/2 inch long. But when I come around to the side that has the tab, I'm going to put my needle through that tab too, just to incorporate it into the seam. And once you've done a few of these, this is a pretty fast process. And there's my premium high loft polyester fill. You can get this at any sewing store. I'm just sort of making it into a ball. Now put it in that bowl, and I'll just be careful that when I'm pulling my thread now to gather up this bowl and make it into a completely enclosed pom-pom, that I'm not catching any of the fur and that all of that white fill is inside. And I'll do a triple knot, and I'm pulling this very tight. And I want this to be strong. And you just hit it a couple of times to fluff it up. And now I'm going to push those ends. And they're just cut from a scrap of the fleece from the hat. So I've cut it, those ends, so they aren't on the stretch. And I'm going to find my little tab, and I'll stick one end through the tab. And I could stick the other end through in the opposite direction if I wanted to, but I'm going to take it out in a minute to show you how to make a fleece pom-pom in case you haven't got access to faux fur. And there we have a cute little pom-pom hat for a cute little head. And now let's make a pom-pom in fleece. So I have an 18-inch long piece of fleece, and I'm going to cut the 18 inches in the stretchy direction, and 3.5 inches or 9 centimeters deep. I've used my washable marker to mark the center, and then another 1/4 inch or 50 millimeters. I put another line in, and that's going to be the line that I cut to, and I'm fringing, so that's folded in half, so I'm cutting through 2 layers, and my clips are in the center. And they're also helping me see how far not to cut. And now I'm going to use that same needle, but just a single strand of this thick thread or cotton. And I'm going to do a basting stitch and gather up that entire 18-inch length, going right down the middle. So I'm following my washable marker line for the middle, which makes it pretty easy. Now we're going to tie a piece of this, this is gray, like a charcoal gray fleece. So I've cut another long strand of this fleece in about a little bit wider than those fringes that I've made, and in the direction that doesn't stretch as well. So I'm just going to wrap this thread now around my wad of fringe several times so that it makes it easier to tie into a knot with my end that I left at the beginning. And as I wrap it, I'm going to keep pulling it tighter and tighter. And then I'm going to cover this thread with a piece of gray fleece with extra long ends as well. And those ends are going to be the ones that I put into the top of the hat and tie into the tab. If you want a fluffier pom-pom, you can cut those fringes narrower than I did, or you can make the piece a little bit longer. But this is pretty fun. This works well. And I'm just fluffing it up as well, just like I did with the fur. And if you want a smaller pom-pom, you don't need to go 3.5 inches deep on your template. You can go 3 or 2.5. And there I'm putting the ends through my tab. And I'll just trim off some of that extra. And look at that. That's fun too. So there's two options there for making a pom-pom, but it's an awfully cute little hat for an extremely cute little head. Thank you so much for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. We're just getting started. We're going to have lots and lots of videos about how to make hats, how to wear hats, and how to love hats. So until we meet again, happy sewing. Thanks for watching, and bye.